I'm going to show you exactly how to build this password strength matcher, which is a great project if you want to test your regular expression skills or you want to just test your JavaScript skills in general. Let's get started now. But first, I want to talk about today's video sponsor, which is Atlantic.net Hosting, and they're going to be giving you an entire year-long free trial of their servers. And these are pretty powerful servers. They're more powerful than the servers you're going to find with any other free trial out there, and this free trial lasts an entire year, not just a single month. On top of that, these servers have great data reliability and backup systems, and on top of that, if you use the code Kyle, you're going to get an additional $50 of credit. So make sure you sign up for Atlantic.net using the link down in the description below. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name's Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream project sooner. So if that sounds interesting, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this one. Now to get started, I have the final version of our product on the right, and as you can see, we can type into this, and as we type more and more complex passwords, we're going to see this bar at the top increase, and then everything at the bottom is going to be changes we can make to our password to make it more secure. So I'm going to show you exactly how to build this. And to get started, we're going to need some HTML. So let's create an index.html file. If we hit exclamation point and tab, that is going to give us our boilerplate code, as you can see here. We can just give it a title of password strength. And then we need just a little bit of HTML to get all of our different components. The first thing we need is our title. We're just going to give this an h1. And inside of this title, we'll just put that text. We'll say password strength test, just like that. The next thing we're going to need is this progress bar. And now HTML has a progress bar element built in, but it's really hard to style and not that useful if you want to have these cool custom styles like this. So we're just going to use our own custom div, and we're just going to give this div a class of strength meter, just like that. And we'll put nothing inside of it because all of the styling is going to be handled by this strength meter class. Next, we're going to need this input for our actual password. So we're going to have an input of type text. And the reason that we're using type text here is because we don't actually want to hide the password. If we used type password, it would hide the password from the user, and we don't want to hide it while they're typing it because that's kind of counterintuitive. Also, since this is the only input on our page, I want to set this to autofocus. That just means as soon as someone goes to our page, their cursor is automatically going to be put inside of this input box so they can start typing immediately without having to click inside of it. Also, we're going to use an attribute called area labeled by. And what this is going to do is essentially going to give a label to our input for people that are using screen readers, since we don't actually have a label on our screen. We're just going to call this password. So that way that when people come to our page that can't see properly or are using a screen reader, when they tab into this box, it'll tell them that this is a password box that they should put their password inside of. Now the last thing we need is a place to put all of these different comments. I'm just going to create a div, and this div is just going to have an ID of reasons, just like that. And let's also give it a class of reasons as well so we can style it. And that's all the HTML we're going to need. So let's open this up with Live Server to see what we have so far. And as you can see, we just have our basic password strength test, our input, and then our two empty divs are hidden because they have nothing inside of them, which is okay for now. Now the first thing that I want to do is to apply some styles to this just so we know what we're working with and we have something visual to look at. And in order to do that, instead of creating a separate style sheet, I'm just going to create these styles in line, and that's just because of how simple and small this application is. Normally I would create a separate style sheet, but putting it all in one page is going to make it easier for us to see and reason with as we go through the project. Now the very first thing I like to do in any project is I want to select the before elements, I want to select all of the after elements, and I want to select every element and just change the box sizing to border box. And if you're confused as to why I do that, I'll link a video where I explain this concept up in the cards and down in the description below, but this just makes it easier to size things. Next, I want to focus on the body, and for the body, I want to set a really dark background color, which is going to give us that dark theme, and this has a purple background color, and in our case, we're just going to use this HSL color, which has a hue of 261, saturation of 88%, and a lightness of 17%. Now if we save, you see we get that really dark purple color. But of course we need to change our text to be a lot lighter to be visible. So we're going to change our color to be very similar to this HSL, but instead we're just going to change our lightness. For example here, we're going to use 90% lightness instead. And that's going to give us a mostly white looking color, but it's still going to have a slight purple hue, and our entire site is going to share that same hue of 261 and saturation of 88%, which I think is going to give it a really nice coherent look. As you can see over here, everything has that nice purple hue to it, which looks really good. So we're going to try to share that throughout all of our application. Now the last thing I want to do is just make sure all of our text is going to be centered. So we're just going to say text align center here. That's going to align everything in the center of our page, which I think looks much better. Now we have our strength meter. So let's select that strength meter. And inside of here, we want to create essentially a progress bar. We're going to give this progress bar a height, which is going to be 2 rem, and we're going to give it a width. And that width is just going to be 90%. And let's give it just a little bit of a border so we can actually see what we're working with. So we're going to say our border is going to be a 3 pixel solid. And again, let's copy that exact same HSL color, but instead we're going to use a different lightness. We'll just use 57% here. Now if we save, you're going to notice nothing shows up. And that is just because it looks like I spelled strength incorrectly. So let's make sure I spell that correctly and save. And as you can see, we now have that nice rectangular looking box for now. And in order to make this an actual rounded corner, as we have over here, let's just make sure we add a border radius. So inside of here, let's do a border radius, which is going to be 1 rem. If we save, that gives us those nice rounded corners, which looks really good. Also, we want to make sure that we align this in the center of our screen. So if we just set a margin, which is going to be 0 auto, that is going to align us in the center of the screen by using the same amount of margin on the left and the right hand side, which looks really good. Now next, I want to move on to the inner portion of our progress bar, which is actually really easy to style. All we need to do in order to create this is to come down and select our strength meter again, but we want to select an element which is the before element inside of it. This essentially is going to add a pseudo element to this strength meter, and if you're unfamiliar with the before pseudo element, I have an entire video on it in the cards and description down below. So in order to do this, let's just set our content to an empty string that'll actually allow our element to appear on the page, and we're going to actually position this absolutely inside of our strength meter. So we need to make sure our strength meter has a position of relative. Now that that's done, let's make sure it's always going to be on the left-hand side of our page. That way it lines up on the very left of our progress bar. And we also want to make sure that the height is always going to be 100%. Now let's just put a placeholder width in here of 10. And we're going to want to give this a background color, which in our case is going to be, again, a similar hue and that similar saturation. But we're going to take this lightness and just make it a little bit brighter. Now if we save, you can see that we have the inner portion of our progress bar showing up. But you'll notice that these edges are clipping over like this. We want to get rid of that, so we're just going to come in here and set our overflow to hidden. That's going to make sure that anything that clips outside of the bounds is going to be completely hidden. And if we want to make this a pill shape instead of have this flat end here, all we need to do is set our border radius to, for example, 1 rem and save, and you notice that we now have that pill shape. I think it looks a little bit better as just the flat bar right here. I think it makes it look like it's filling up even more. So we're just going to get rid of that border radius and keep it as is for now. One problem that you'll notice though is that our width is completely hard coded, and we want to be able to change this inside of our JavaScript. So in order to do that, let's actually use a CSS variable. We can use a CSS variable which is going to be called strength. We're going to set this variable anywhere between 0 and 100. And in order to convert that value to a percentage, we just need to use a quick calculation where we take 1% and multiply it by our strength value. That way we can convert our integer, which is between 1 and 100, to some form of percentage. That way we can take this strength value and convert it to a percentage, so that way we can actually set our width properly. So if, for example, our strength here was set to 20 like that, and we save, you now see we get a 20% full bar. If we set it to 100, it's completely full. And if we set it to 0, it's completely empty. Now, obviously, we don't want to control this strength inside of our meter here. So let's remove this and just make sure we set a fallback value here of 0. So by default, if strength is not set, it's just going to be a 0 strength password. So if we save, you see that it has no width at all. Also, we want to make sure that we have a slight transition, which is going to take place for our width. We're just going to set this to 200 milliseconds. And that way, as our password becomes stronger, as you can see over here, or weaker, it nicely animates in between the different states. Instead of just jumping to the very next percentage, it animates from where it is to the next position, which looks really good. Now the next thing to work on is this input box for the password. Let's give this a class so we can select it. We'll just say password input, and we're also going to give it an ID, which is password input as well. And then lastly, we'll give it a value of password. just so that we can actually have a placeholder value inside of here. I think that looks pretty good. So let's select our password input. And inside of our password input, we need to essentially style it so that it's larger and has some margin on the top and the bottom. So the first thing that we can do here is we can take our width, set it to 90% so that we match the exact same size of our element up here for our progress bar, which looks really good. We can also set in some padding to make this look quite a bit larger. So we're just going to do a padding here of 0.25 rem and 0.75 rem, just like that. That looks pretty good. The next thing I want to do is set our background color. And I want to use this same HSL color that we've been using before, but we're going to use a very dark color of 25%, and we're going to change our text color to be white. That way this stands out really apparently against all of the rest of our application. Now we can remove our border by changing it to a different border, which in our case is just going to be a 1 pixel solid border with that same HSL value, and this time we're going to make it 57%. So it looks a little bit brighter and kind of blends in with the border for our input element up here for our progress bar. Also, let's add a little bit of a margin on the top. We'll use 1 rem that just spaces this downward, which looks pretty good. We're going to remove the outline that happens. So when we actually click on our element, we don't get that annoying blue outline around it. But when we remove that, we need to make sure that we come in and add our own focus state to replace that outline. In our case, we're just going to change our border color to be a slightly different color. So we'll just come in here and say that we want this to, for example, be 70%. Now when we click, you'll notice this gets lighter to really emphasize the fact that we're inside this input. Now the next thing that I want to do is to come in here and align my text in the center. That way it's just aligned very similar to everything else on our page, right in the center. And also round out those corners. We'll use a border radius of 0.3 rem and save, and that looks pretty good. Pretty much exactly the same as what we have over here. Now the very last thing to work on is going to be the section down here, which contains all of our different reasons. So let's select our reasons, and we want to select every single thing that's inside of our reasons. So for example, if we had a div in here that said reason 1, and we copy that down and we had reason 2, just like this is what we're going to be styling. And all we want to do is add some margin on the top. We'll just say 0.5 rem. And inside of here, we're going to change our color, and we're actually going to make this so that it's not quite as bright as everything else on our page. We're going to bring this down to about 80% instead. Now, if we save, you'll see it fades a little bit more into the background, and that way it doesn't just jump out as apparently as the text for our actual password, because we want this section, our password, to be the most visually appealing, and then the next visually appealing thing is going to be this progress bar. That way these fade into the background just a little bit. And right there, that's pretty much all of the styles we're going to need for this application. So we can move on to the fun part, which is going to be adding in all of our JavaScript. First, let's just remove all of our reasons so that we have a completely blank slate to start with. And I just want to add in a script tag here, which is going to be for a file called script.js that we're going to create. And we're going to defer that so it loads after all of our HTML. Now let's create that. We're going to call it script.js. And inside of here, we need to select all of our different elements. The first thing we're going to need is this strength meter. I'll just give it an ID, so we can just say strength meter. And now inside of our JavaScript, we can select our strength meter by just setting that equal to document.getElement by ID of strength meter, just like that. Also, we're going to need to get this password input, which already has an ID of password input. So we can again just copy this. We can get our password input, and this has a value here of password input. And then the last thing that we're going to need inside of here is our reasons section, which again has its own ID. So we're going to want to get our reasons container, and this just has an ID of reasons, just like that. Now what we can do is set up all of our code to check our password against all of our different conditions to see if it's strong or if it's a weak password. So let's get started with a simple function, which is going to calculate our password strength. So we'll just call it exactly that, calculate password strength. And we're just going to pass in our password into here that we want to calculate the strength of. And then inside of here, we're going to create an array, which we're just going to call weaknesses. And this is essentially all of the faults of our password that make it a weak password. And at the end, we're going to return all of these different weaknesses. And in between these sections, what we want to do is add all of our weaknesses in. So we can say weaknesses.push, and inside of here, we want to push each one of our different weaknesses. And in order to calculate our weaknesses, we're going to do those in separate functions. So we're going to have a function here, which is going to be called length weakness, and we can just pass in our password. And this is going to give us any of the weaknesses that our password has related to its length. So we can just come in here and call that length weakness by passing in our password. And now in here, we can return any weaknesses we have related to length. So let's just get the length of our password, which is going to be equal to password.length. And we just need to do some simple checks. For example, if our password length right here is less than or equal to 5, then that means it's a really short password and it has a very large security problem with it. So we want to return a weakness, which is just going to be a simple JavaScript object that's going to contain a message, which we're going to put in this bottom section here. And it's also going to contain a deduction. And this deduction is essentially how much it's going to affect our strength meter up here. We're going to start with a 100 strength password, and each deduction is going to subtract whatever number this is. So for example, if this is 20, it's going to subtract 20% from our password strength. So for this one, we're going to have a big subtraction of 40% because a password that short is really, really insecure. And our message is just going to say your password is too short, just like that. So if our password is less than or equal to 5 characters, we have this deduction. Next, we're going to do another check here, which is going to say if our length is less than or equal to 10. This is a smaller problem, but still a little bit of a problem. So we're going to return another weakness, which is just going to say your password could be longer. And instead of having a big deduction here, we're just going to have a small deduction of about 15%. Now, if we save that and we were to call this calculate password strength function, it's going to give us the strength of our password. So let's make sure we call this every time we change our password input. So if we come down here and just say password input.add event listener, and we want to add an event listener, which is going to be on input, that'll call every single time we change our password. And then inside of here, we're just going to call a simple function. And this function is going to get our weaknesses. So we'll just say weaknesses are going to be equal to calculate password strength. We're going to pass in our password, which is just password input.value, just like that. And then we can just console.log all of our different weaknesses to see exactly what our problem is. So let's inspect our page. And if I drag this over, go to our console, right now we have nothing. So if I start typing a password, I click this, you can see we have an object here that says your password could be longer is our message, and we have a deduction of 15. If our password is super short, you see that we're going to get another object that has a deduction of 40 that says your password is too short, just like that. And if we have a really long password, you're going to see that we have an object which is essentially just an undefined object, because inside of our length weakness, we don't actually return anything. So we're just pushing undefined into our weaknesses. So we're going to essentially need to just ignore that undefined value because our password has no weaknesses. So now let's focus on what we need to do to actually add in this data into our page and actually show it inside of our password strength meter. We can actually create a new function for this, which we're going to call update strength meter. And inside of here is where we're going to do all of that updating. And we can just take everything we have so far here, paste it into here. And then instead of calling a function here, we're just going to call our update strength meter function, just like that. So that way we can call this function immediately, right away, as soon as our input changes. And we are right now calculating all of our different weaknesses. So instead of printing out our weakness, what I want to do is just loop through all of our weaknesses. So we'll say for each one of our weaknesses, we're going to have a weakness, and we want to do something inside of here. Well, the first thing we want to do is calculate our strength value. So we need to have some starting strength value. So we're just going to call this strength here equal to 100, because we start with 100 and then we subtract all of our different deductions. So in here, we can just say strength is going to minus equal our weakness dot deduction. So this is going to subtract our deduction from our strength and then resave that to our strength value. So in this example, if our password is 0 characters, we'll subtract 40 from 100 and we're going to end up with 60. So then down here, we can take our strength meter, which we have up here, and we can take this strength meter, get the style from it, and then we want to set a property. And this is where we set that strength variable we created in CSS, and we just set it to our strength value here. So now if I save this and I type something, you're going to notice our password immediately jumps all the way up here because it's longer than 5 characters, so it's only being subtracted by 15%. If we make it really long, you're going to notice it actually doesn't go all the way up to 100%. And that's because we're not accounting for the issue where we have an undefined weakness here. If you remember right, in our array, Here we're returning nothing, which means we have undefined. So essentially all we just need to do is return here if our weakness is undefined. So say it's just equal to null, then we want to return. Now if we save, you can see our password's at that 85%. If it gets too short, it goes down to 60%. And if it gets long enough, it goes all the way up to 100%. But you'll notice an issue when we refresh our page, it doesn't actually calculate our password strength right away. So we need to make sure we call our update password strength function right away. So if we do this right away, as soon as our page loads and save, you see it immediately updates our strength based on this input value here. And if we change this, you can see it's updating our strength in real time, which is great news. Now we need to make sure we display all of the reasons as well. And this again is pretty easy. We already have our reasons container, and we just want to make sure we clear this out by setting the inner HTML to an empty string. That's going to completely clear out that div every single time we update our strength meter. And then inside of here, we just take that reasons container and we want to essentially append a child. But that child we need to first create. So we're just going to create a message, which is going to be equal to our document.create element. And we're just going to create a div, and we'll call this message element just to be very explicit. And we want to append that to our reasons container. And in order to set the text, we'll just set the inner text here of our message element equal to our weakness.message. Now if we save, you can see our text is immediately put down here. And if our password becomes extra short, you can see we get that shorter version of our message. And if it's long enough, that message goes completely away. So we have essentially all of the code we need to update our reasons, to update our strength meter. Now all that's left is to get all of the different calculations for the different weaknesses of our password, because right now we only have length, and that's not a very good tell for if our password is good or bad. So the very first thing I want to do is just close down some of these functions, since we already know what they all do. And the next thing here is I want to create a new weakness, and this one is going to be for lowercase characters. So we're just going to call it lowercase weakness. We're again going to pass in our password. So let's create that function, which is called lowercase weakness, and it takes in a password. And inside of here, what we need to do is create some form of regular expression, which is going to calculate the number of lowercase characters inside of our password, because we want to make sure there are at least a certain number of lowercase characters. And that's actually pretty easy. The regular expression that we're going to need to use for this is going to just be here, a value of here, these brackets, and anything inside of here is going to be a range, so between A and Z. Essentially every value between A and Z is what we want to calculate. And if we put a G at the end here, that means it's going to be global. So this is actually going to return to us an array of all of the different values inside of our password that match this selector. So essentially an array of all of our lowercase letters. And if you're confused by regular expressions, I have an entire video breaking down everything you need to know about regular expressions, linked in the cards and description down below. So this is our regular expression defined. Now what we need to do is take our actual password and compare it to that. So we can say password.match, and this is going to match our string against a regular expression, which we can just paste our regular expression inside of here. And this is going to return us an array of all of the values it found, or undefined if it finds nothing. So we're just going to set this to an empty array if it does not find anything. So then we can just set this to an array here value called matches. And this is going to be essentially the array of all of the different characters that match our regular expression. So then we can just check down here if our matches dot length equals 0, then this means essentially we have not found any lowercase characters at all. So we want to essentially return a weakness because we need to have lowercase characters. So it's going to have a message that says, your password has no lowercase characters. And we're going to put in a deduction here, which is going to be 20 points. And then we're going to have another check to make sure that we have a decent number of lowercase characters. So here we're going to check to see if it's less than or equal to 2. And then here it's just going to say your password could use more lowercase characters. We're just going to have a deduction of 5. And now if we save, now we have this lowercase weakness check. So if we were to delete everything, you're going to notice that we say your password is too short and it has no lowercase characters. If we add in 1, it's going to say it could use more. If we add in 2, same thing. But as soon as we get to 3, you're going to see that weakness goes away. So now we have our lowercase weakness set up, our length weakness set up. The next thing to work on is going to be our uppercase weakness. So we can copy this and create our uppercase weakness. And we're going to create another function called uppercase weakness, which takes in a password. But one thing that you're going to notice immediately about this uppercase weakness is it essentially is the exact same code as our lowercase weakness. We just change our regular expression and change this from lowercase to uppercase. So let's create a helper function that can do both of these at once and just pass in the values we need. So let's just take a function. We're going to call this character type weakness. And this is going to take in here our password. It's going to take in the regular expression, and it's also going to take in what type of character we're actually checking for. So this regular expression is going to be this section here. So we'll copy that down, and we're just going to place this as our regular expression. And then this type is going to be for inside of these different strings. So if we just copy our if check down, just like this, we can change these strings to be template strings, just like this, so we can actually insert characters inside of here, which in our case is going to be our type variable. And we're going to do the exact same thing down here, change this to a template string with the backticks, and then use that variable of type. Now we can call this character type weakness up here inside of our lowercase weakness. Make sure that we actually return that, and we pass in our password. We pass in this regular expression right here, and we're just going to pass in the type of our character, which in our case is lowercase characters. So just like that, we can delete all of this, and now we have our lowercase weakness completely done just by doing this simple helper function here. And to do our uppercase weakness is almost exactly the same, except for we're just going to replace this with uppercase. And here, instead of a range from lowercase a to z, we do a range from uppercase a to z. Now if we save, you immediately see we have our uppercase check working. With 0, we have this warning. With 1, we have this warning. And if we go all the way up to 3, our warnings are completely removed. Now we can kind of minimize these functions because we already know that they're done. And we can move on to another type of character weakness that I want to discuss, which is going to be numbers. Obviously, all passwords should have some form of number. So we're going to replace this with numbers. And here we're going to have a range between 0 and 9. Now, as you can see, we're not getting our error showing up, and that's because we need to make sure that we actually check this inside of calculating our password strength. And now you can see our password has no numbers. Now it could use more, and now it has all the numbers that it needs. Another type of regular expression we can check for is going to be special characters. Just like that. And the special characters going to have the text special characters. And our regular expression is going to be a little bit more complicated. We want to essentially get everything that's not everything that we've checked before. So not 0 to 9, not lowercase a to z, not uppercase a to z, and also not any form of white space. So that's what this \s is doing. And in order to do a not, we just put in this little caret symbol, and it's going to say essentially not anything that's inside of this list. So now if we save and put our special character weakness up here, just like that, and save, now you can see this, your password has no special characters. If we add in like an exclamation point, you can see it could use more. And if we add in a couple more special characters, you can see that warning completely disappears. So now we essentially have all of our different character types being checked for. The last thing I want to check for is if you repeat values in a row, because it's really bad to have multiple repeated values in a password, such as 111 or 222. So I want to make sure to check for that as well. So in order to do that, let's create a brand new function, and it's going to be very similar to this function down here. So we're going to create a function which is called repeat characters weakness. It's going to take in our password, and inside of here, what we're going to do is a very similar thing here. We're going to get our number of matches because we're going to match against a regular expression. But what exactly is this regular expression going to be? This is actually a pretty simple regular expression where we're going to take a selector, which is a group, and this is just selecting anything. This period character means it can be absolutely anything. So this first group is going to be absolutely anything. And then by using this \1, it is essentially saying whatever our first group, which is this period, contains, I want you to match against that. So essentially this is saying anything inside this first group followed by the exact same thing that was in the first group. So essentially 2 things in a row. So if we have 2 things in a row, this is going to match that. So if we have lowercase a, or uppercase a, this is going to match all of those. So then what we can do is have a simple if check here where we can just say matches.length is greater than 0. And if, for example, we have more than 0 matches to this, so essentially we have weaknesses, we want to return those weaknesses with a message that says, whoops, your password has repeat characters. And then we have a deduction here. And we're actually going to calculate this deduction from our matches. So we can just say matches.length times 10, because the more repeats you have, the weaker your password is. Now let's make sure we use that up here by just calling that repeat characters weakness. And now if we save, you're going to immediately notice it says your password has repeat characters because we have 2 S's in a row. If I remove one of those, you can see our password strength has increased and the warning went away. If, for example, we have a bunch of repeat characters, you can see for each one, our password is going to get weaker and weaker and weaker until eventually it gets all the way down to 0. And if we were to construct a password, for example, that has a bunch of different things inside of it, which are going to be lowercase and uppercase letters and all of the different symbols that we can think of, just like that, you can see we're going to get a 100% secure password, which is exactly what we want. And that's all there is to creating a password strength test. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out my other JavaScript projects linked over here and subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this one. Thank you very much for watching and have a good day.